Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Well, hi, and this snowy day. It's great to be inside where it's nice and warm. Good to see you again, Fahrusha.
Hey there, Kate. Yes, indeed. And this is a milestone broadcast in several ways. First of all, today is December 30th, 2017. So this is our last podcast of 2017.
Well, that's true.
That's a milestone.
Okay.
And the second milestone is that this is our 60th episode.
Time goes fast when you're having fun.
Time flies, right? And not only that, what we're dealing with here to start off with is something that seems relatively big in the area of unidentified flying objects, UFOs or UAPs or unidentified aerial phenomena, depending on how you want to look at it. And the revelations, which was the wonderful word you came up with a few moments ago.
It's seasonal.
The revelations about possible disclosure. Now, I want to say to start off with that I don't have a dog in this race. I really don't, because I've heard both sides of this argument as saying that it's disinformation and that other people saying it's not. So just to be very brief about what's going on is that we started out in probably several years ago was the first time I heard about Tom DeLonge. Now, right. Tom DeLonge is a rock star whose fame was mostly in the 90s, late 90s, involving his group. But it's still going. Blink 182, I believe it's called. I don't know the number. I always get that screwed up. But in any case, Tom DeLonge apparently has always been interested in UFOs. And he somehow was contacted by people in the Defense Intelligence Agency or similar, people in the clandestine services of the United States about UFOs. And this goes back a few years ago. And this always sort of seemed like, well, is this going to be just another disinformation project in like Benowitz and that group? Do we have to explain who Benowitz was?
It would be too lengthy right now.
You're right. Well, Benowitz, just very briefly, was a scientist, an engineer, I believe, who was observing Los Alamos from the outside and seeing strange things flying up and down. And there were people there who may have been, Richard Doty may have been amongst them, and they sort of made the man go crazy, and he ended up dying.
Who the gods would destroy.
Yes. So we were, I was looking at the Tom DeLonge thing years ago, and I'm thinking, I don't know what I think about this. And then, lo and behold, they made a few statements in October, and Tom DeLonge got on the stage on a Facebook direct broadcast and got on the stage with a bunch of people saying that they were going to start a group called To the Stars Academy, and they were going to research UFOs, and they were going to come out with some revelations. And on that stage was Luis Elizondo, who had recently retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he knows the head of the Defense Department and served with him in Vietnam, James Mattis. Now, also on that stage was Hal Puthoff, Jim Semivan, and maybe 3 other people who I can't recall their names, but they're all high up in former military intelligence. Now, the only one of these people I have ever met is Hal Puthoff. And I met him at the IRVA convention a couple of years ago, where he gave a brief address, and I asked him a question which concerned, I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name now, somebody who was with remote viewing. He was a police chief who died in Las Vegas, and nobody knows who killed him, whether somebody killed him in Las Vegas. And he was a former person with Scientology, and apparently Hal Puthoff was a Scientologist briefly. And so things become murky. But I had asked Dr. Puthoff, I think he's a PhD, and I may be giving him an extra credit, but I asked him about these UFO bases that he had reported in Australia. There was apparently some evidence that this remote viewer gave about a UFO base in around Australia, and he seemed to answer me in the affirmative that indeed there was, and this was in front of a lot of people at the IRVA convention. So that was amazing to me at the moment, and I did have a brief conversation with him afterwards. But I would not say I know him to any extent, but I did in fact meet him. So that was all interesting, and so all these guys got up on the stage on Facebook with Tom DeLonge, and they said they were going to start a company, which they did, and it has raised $2 million, and that's kind of impressive. But it was part entertainment and part scientific exploration and other things. So I was very confused by it all. Well, lo and behold, a little while later, a press release came out and an article in the New York Times the week before Christmas. And one of the authors of this New York Times article was our former guest, Leslie Kean. Yeah, and Ralph Blumenthal, and the other lady will have to forgive me because I'm winging this. And it was 3 of them wrote this New York Times article, and Leslie Kean said it was incredibly well vetted, and they were not allowed to use any anonymous sources, and it was all very exciting, according to Leslie Kean, and who I respect. I think she's a good researcher.
Yes, absolutely. Her word I take.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So what they did show was 2 kind of hazy videotapes of these objects, which they referred to as Tic Tacs, because of their kind of oblong or trapezoid shape that apparently were chased by pilots off the Nimitz, which is a big aircraft carrier. And so that was the beginning of what would appear to be some form of disclosure. Now we get to the part about the 3 senators, Harry Reid, Daniel Inouye, and Ted Stevens. So this is a bipartisan type of an effort. But apparently, Harry Reid, who was the senator from Nevada, was well acquainted with Bob Bigelow, exactly. And Bob Bigelow had been researching through the NIDS, the National
MUFON and SIDS, what is it?
NIDS, National
Discovery Science. Whatever.
National Institute of Discovery Science. Now we know our other friend of the show, who's been on twice, former Army Colonel John B. Alexander, PhD. He has been on the show twice and quite a friend of the show, and he was involved with NIDS during the time that they were at the Sherman Ranch. Now, apparently, Bob Bigelow has kind of, I don't know if he sold the Sherman Ranch at this point,
I don't know.
or he's no longer conducting all his research in the Sherman Ranch. But he has started this research with the government, and even before, well, maybe not before, I can't even say that, but certainly before this piece of disclosure, let us say, a lot of UFO sightings were being referred to NIDS. Like if you would call the government with a UFO sighting, they'd say, go call NIDS. And so Harry Reid apparently went to the Sherman Ranch, apparently saw some of the stuff that Bob Bigelow had collected, and said, and he did in fact put out with Daniel Inouye and Ted Stevens, they did put out a bid, and Bob Bigelow came in the lowest. And in fact, Bob Bigelow has put a lot of his own money into this research. Long story short, the government had a secret program, which they denied, for researching UFOs out of the Department of Defense, the Defense Intelligence Agency, headed by Louis Elizondo, who just apparently quit. And that's kind of the story. So there are people like Leslie Kean and John Alexander who are saying, you know, this can be the real thing. John Alexander said it's been going on for a long time, this quarter inch by quarter inch disclosure, if you will. And he does make an extremely good point about this, that you can't get money from the Defense Department unless it is considered to be a threat to the country or to the airspace. So my thought on this is that the quote-unquote others, you could call them aliens, you could call them others, you could call them beings or whatever, that it's being portrayed by this group as being a threat to us or evil or whatever like that. And I don't like that on one hand. On the other hand, I take Alexander's point that, in fact, they can't get financed unless it's seen as a threat. So, and then there are other people out there that say, oh, this is just the intelligence services putting us into a...
Well, the long story short is it's just like Project Blue Book all over again. You know, they investigate, they may or may not find something. They say, oh, no, nothing out there. Don't worry about it. Move along. And then they close that down. The research continues. And the same thing happened with this project as well. I mean, I'm sure the research is still continuing.
Ongoing, sure.
Yeah, look at the Phoenix Lights alone. Just that one case, you have a half-mile object, aerial vessel, going through Class Bravo airspace over Sky Harbor in Arizona. And it's going through at about 20, 30 mile an hour. I don't know how many knots. And totally, the Air Force goes up and they blow them off. So it's not so much a threat as it is just well, the hell with you. You know, we'll do it whatever we want. And I don't think the big boys like that.
No, I know for a fact that in all governments, no matter if it's this government or the government of Chile or the government of Uganda,
Right.
It really doesn't make a difference, but they don't like to feel like they're not in control of their own airspace, and
Right.
that
And
goes
why,
without saying.
That's why all investigations are kept secret, because they're not producing anything. Everyone thinks that the government's hiding something. I don't. I think the government doesn't know any more than we do.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what comes of this, but we're not looking with an eye to say that there's nothing. Certainly, we are not
No.
debunkers, but we do look with a slightly skeptical eye. We've got our fingers crossed and our eyes wide open.
No, not me. I know what they are. They're the Klingons. No, seriously, there's objects up there. They're flying around. Nobody knows what they are, hence UFOs or
Yes.
UAPs or whatever. And obviously, Mr. Ray has investigated these fairly thoroughly, too.
Yes. Well, I think we're coming time to talk with today's guest, who is in fact a member of MUFON.
Which is the Mutual UFO Network.
Which is a mutual UFO.
Sort of bought out by Bob Bigelow at one point.
Yes,
which
yes.
is an interesting connection there, too.
Yes.
And is now sort of not quite the membership it used to have.
Well,
it's surviving.
It's surviving, and we'll have to. I don't want this to be necessarily about MUFON per se,
but
because that's a whole
that's
a whole tar baby by itself that we don't need to do that today. But who we're going to be speaking to is Dr. Terry Ray. Now, Dr. Terry Ray is a professor emeritus in the law department of Indiana University of Pennsylvania. He is presently a full-time author with Sunbury Press and is primarily a novelist, but has also authored several nonfiction works. Besides his nonfiction book, The Complete Story of the Worldwide Invasion of the Orange Orbs, Terry has also written an extraterrestrial novel, which I've read, called GXM 731. Terry was a military pilot during the Vietnam War and was honorably discharged as a disabled veteran. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Grove City College, a master's of education, and a Juris Doctor from Duquesne University. I can never say that. I always want to say Duquesne, but I won't say that. No, Duquesne University. He was a Pittsburgh trial lawyer after graduation from law school, then accepted a faculty position at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania as a law professor. As a field investigator for MUFON, Terry investigates assigned cases in western Pennsylvania. After having his own UFO experience in 2012 in Ocean City, Maryland, seeing 8 large orange orbs silently flying through the night sky over the beach, he set out to find an explanation for what he has seen. And from this point, we're going to introduce Dr. Terry Ray. Hey, Terry.
Welcome to the show. So it's an interesting, I guess we might as well start with the sighting.
Well, let's talk about your sighting a little bit in Ocean City. Can you give us a little synopsis of that?
Sure. I was sitting out on the balcony about 10 o'clock at night, and my wife and 3 kids were inside, and I wasn't allowed to watch television because they were sleeping, so I was banished out onto the balcony, and I saw I was facing the Atlantic Ocean, and to my right, which would be the north, I saw a very tiny orange dot, which caught my attention because as a pilot, there are certain colors you are accustomed to seeing in the night sky. They are primarily white, red, and green. Those are the colors you see. You do not see something that's orange. And this thing continued to grow in size. And I realized it was coming south toward me. And when it got to be, I would estimate about 5 miles away, it was about the size of a full moon. And it looked like a setting sun, almost exactly like a setting sun. It just hovered there about 5 miles away, right where the ocean meets the sand, and stayed in that position for probably a couple of minutes, and then started moving directly out to sea. It went out what I would estimate about 10 miles, and then stopped, paused there for a while, then rose rather rapidly up to about 10,000 feet, and then headed south at a level altitude, and then turned southeast directly into a thunderstorm.
Into a thunderstorm?
Into a thunderstorm, yeah.
Wow.
They frequently go into thunderstorms. There's a whole other story about that, but I think it's probably to absorb energy and power.
Huh.
But after this disappeared, about a minute later, I saw another dot on the northern horizon. And this orange dot did the exact same thing that the first one did, precisely the same maneuver. And it ended up heading off into the thunderstorm. And in all, I saw 8 of these doing this.
Wow. Terry?
Yes.
Can I ask you if anyone else reported anything to MUFON or any of the other agencies that might receive a UFO report?
One other person did. It was a girl. And she filed a report with MUFON.
Interesting. Now, I want to ask you one more thing, 2 things. Well, one thing which you discuss quite clearly in your book, that it was not a Chinese lantern, and we're going to go in a minute to why it could not have been a Chinese lantern, which I would like you to speak to. But I have one other question, which should be basically a yes or no question, and that is, I have seen a number of things that were orange in the sky, and I was wondering if they could be A, drones, or B, satellites.
No.
No.
Okay.
On both accounts. If they depended on their behavior, but with what I saw, they couldn't be either one of those.
Well, also, anything that was a private plane or a drone would not fly into a thunderstorm. They'd fly around it. So,
True.
So that alone would indicate that it's not terrestrial.
And
or known terrestrial.
And generally, satellites don't make turns, right angle turns.
Or hover over the beach.
Right.
Well,
But
maybe
just
on vacation.
we, we hear this back at us. People who are interested in UAPs and UFOs. Oh, it must have been a drone type of thing. And in certain airspaces, people are so used to seeing drones, they barely even look up. I've seen 2 cases of drones, purported drones, I have no way to know for sure, above the airspace in Providence, Rhode Island, over different events. And these drones seem to be flying over large public events in Providence, Rhode Island. And nobody even bothers to look up. I find it amazing. Oh, yeah, it's a drone. That's it. They're not even looking up anymore. So this adds to confusion, I would say. But let's go on from here.
Just one more question. On those 8 orbs that you saw, after they finished these maneuvers, did they then get together, or did they just all leave separately?
No, they disappeared one at a time.
They did. So it wasn't like 8 lights on one chip.
No, they were totally separate.
Wow,
and
that's
I
interesting.
also wanted to point out that they were only, I would estimate, 1,000 feet above the ocean when they were doing, when they stopped above the beach and then started out over the ocean. And another thing, in 2012, people weren't flying drones.
True. That's
new. Before the drone age.
Yes. I wasn't by any means suggesting that your sighting was a drone. I was merely countering what people, the kind of backlash that we get from the debunkers.
So Terry, consider, so they were about 1,000 feet over the water, and you were about a few thousand feet back from the water. How large would you say these things were if you had been standing right next to them? It sounds like they're very large, like several hundred feet.
I would say very large, probably the width of a football field.
Wow, that's huge. And you couldn't discern any structure. It was just simply this frequency of orange light.
I could not discern a structure. Okay. The light was coming from inside, I can tell you that.
Really?
And yes, and they were very hazy looking. You couldn't see the
Yeah.
exact edges of the sphere. It was very hazy.
The one sighting I had was the same thing. Like you couldn't. It almost looked like your eyes were out of focus.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, it's. I guess it's
And I
just
had binoculars with me, and I looked closely.
really.
And yes, and the edges definitely were fuzzy.
So they must be like affecting the atmosphere too. Like when hot air rises up, how it sort of wobbles the air. So wow. So
Well-
it affected the whole atmosphere around it as well. This is really a fascinating sighting.
From your book, and I just want to say we're talking now about his book, The Complete Story of the Worldwide Invasion of the Orange Orbs, by Sunbury Press, is the publisher. Your book is basically divided into three parts. The first part is like statistical, largely about where the orbs have been seen over the United States, and then the second part is primarily lots of eyewitness reports. And then the third part, which is very fascinating, has to do with what you've come down to thinking they're about. And the fuzziness, it seems to be, from your point of view, and I have nothing against this, that the fuzziness and the glow seems to be part of a cloaking device.
Yes.
So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes. In my research, I researched for an entire year, and I read over 2,000 MUFON cases. And there were a number of cases that described in detail how this cloaking takes place. People sight some sort of vehicle in the sky, whatever it may be, and they have seen the cloaking take place, and the orange substance, whatever it is, comes out the bottom of the vehicle, goes up around it, and forms the bubble.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one question to ask you out of curiosity of the many sightings, which you have pages and pages of eyewitness reports in different categories. And the one that really struck me happened at Cape Fear. And I wanted to ask you, is this the beginning of the Bledsoe case that you were reporting on?
I don't really know.
Okay.
That was just one of the cases I picked out, and whether that was connected to that or not, I don't know.
Because in your book, it talks about a man and his son on the Cape Fear River down in the south, and what is that? North Carolina, South Carolina? I'm not. My geography is failing me at the moment, but how they cited several of these orange orbs, and they were on a fishing trip, and how they left. And it sounded just like the beginning of the Bledsoe case, and I was just questioning that. The other things that it would be interesting to talk about, more than unless you have a specific case other than your own which you would like to bring to our attention, I would like to ask you one thing, because if you heard our beginning of the episode today, we spoke about Leslie Kean, and Leslie Kean particularly said that this revelation, this disclosure, if you will not include anything to do with beings, like actual physical or semi-physical beings that would be coming down out of the UAPs or UFOs, because that's not the kind of information that the DIA was collecting. Now, whether I believe that or not is a moot point. But you, on the other hand, have a number of eyewitness reports of beings associated with the orange orbs. Can you give us one of the best cases? Can you talk about that now?
Sure. there have been a number of cases where the beings have been sighted. And one case in particular I found interesting. Actually, there's two I'll tell you about. One had to do with an elderly lady who lived on a farm. I think it was in North Carolina, and they saw just what I saw, this big orange sphere, and it came down all the way and landed right near their barn, which was about 100 yards away. And as they watched, they saw several figures emerge, and the woman described them as being very tall, probably 9 feet tall, very thin, long arms and legs, and she said they began to run faster than any being she's ever seen run, and they scared the hell out of her cattle and dogs. And she was very panicky. It was interesting. I don't think she quite understood what MUFON is, but she ended her case report by saying, "I'm very frightened. Can you please come down here and help me?"
Wow.
Which I thought was interesting.
Wow.
So she was, an unsophisticated person. And there was another sighting.
Well, did anything ever?
I don't remember where it took place, but it was a group of people were down below a big rise in which sort of a plateau up above them. They saw an orange orb come down. It disappeared. So they climbed the grassy hill up to the top of this little plateau, and they saw a group of beings. One was the tall, thin creatures, they're not about 9 feet tall, and they tend to have shiny black covering on them. Almost all the reports of the taller creatures that way. Very long legs and arms, and with them were some smaller creatures that were 3 or 4 feet tall, who had a lighter color, almost grayish color. And there were several people that followed this report together, but they described that their interaction between the tall beings and the little beings was very much like a parent and child. The smaller ones seemed to be playing, and the taller beings seemed to be watching over them as a parent would at a playground.
So the people who were observing this were sort of like poking their heads up over the plateau and watching this?
No, they walked right up.
Did they really?
Yes, they did.
God,
most people would not do that. But
I'm with you. So they walked up to these beings. They saw this orb.
Well, no, they didn't get real close to them, but they were up where they could have been seen by the beings.
Okay, so they're on the same surface, eye level.
Yeah, right.
I think I might be gone like a cool breeze myself.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have all sorts of different reactions to this sort of thing. Sometimes it's fascination, and sometimes it's absolute panic and fear.
Sure, fear of the unknown. But so they were watching these beings interact with each other, two different types. Did the beings try to interact with them? Did they approach the people?
No, they didn't.
Ah, that's interesting.
But there is another case of a hunting party. I don't know if you read this case or not, but there was a hunting party, and they were camping out. And they saw the same thing, this orangish sphere land somewhere beyond where they were in the woods, their campsite. And two of the, I guess, the more intrepid of the hunters decided to go see what these things were. Mm-hmm. And they had to walk about a mile to on a flat, a cleared surface, a grassy surface. And what they saw, they described, it was a small craft. Apparently, the craft had probably uncloaked, so you could actually see the vehicle. It was a relatively small vehicle, and they said they saw two of the tall, black shiny creatures out inspecting this craft, as though sort of like your car had broken down on a highway and you were trying to see what's the matter with it. And these two beings, it was a man and a son. They got fairly close to them, and they said that these beings turned around and looked at them, and then turned around again and went back to whatever they were doing.
Just ignored them.
Yes, but at a certain point, this went on for 5-10 minutes. They were just watching whatever they were doing to their craft. I don't know, maybe changing the headlights. Who knows? But all of a sudden, they felt themselves moving closer to this craft without themselves moving, without walking.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that from the book. Yes,
and closer and closer, and finally, they were pulled right up to these beings, who then took them inside the craft, and they didn't say exactly what went on, but the only thing they said is what they did to us was disgusting.
Well.
And when they were done, they put them back out where they had been, and the craft departed.
Shall we think perhaps the infamous anal probe?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I don't know what I consider disgusting, but that would be one of them.
Well, that was, I don't mean to, I'm not making fun of anybody, but that was a big, bad part of some of the...
But so anyway, actually, it's interesting. It's almost as if you or I, let's say, landed a helicopter, we're repairing it out in the wilds of Africa, and two, I don't know, some sort of a deer or some sort of an animal came up and were watching us. You go, wow, I wonder what kind of an animal that is. You take them in, try to identify them, put them back out.
Right, exactly.
It definitely didn't seem like they were on an equal level with these beings. It was really...
No, definitely not.
Absolutely
they could not resist the whatever. In a lot of the cases, a blue beam is described. That's anytime they want to put something down to the Earth's surface or pull something up. So whatever this
like
blue beam is, it apparently is used to extract things.
Well, this is very, very interesting, and you come to some very interesting conclusions about these beings, and I have no reason to disregard any of your conclusions, except to say that it seems to be about like one class of visitor and beings, but this may not be the only class of visitors and beings that are possible.
True.
And the interesting thing, it has to do with when the beings are seen. The tall beings, particularly running, seem to run in an upright fashion, kind of different than any human or ape might run in.
They do. They sort of lean backwards a bit. We lean forward, but they tend to be very erect and lean backwards somewhat when they run, which I don't know how they do.
Yeah, really. That's
well.
I mean, just thinking.
Logical,
well, maybe their bones are the angle of the joints are different, but still,
Who knows if they even have bones?
Yeah, that's true too. Wow. Well, then I guess we should get to what did you conclude from all this? I mean, it seems to me that there's so many sightings. If you were going on a voyage of discovery, let's say we did have warp speed and we wanted to investigate planets, you would, just like Star Trek, send 1, 2, maybe 3 vessels. If, on the other hand, it was an invasion force, you would send multiple vessels. So either, I don't know, the number of sightings bothers me more than the sighting itself.
Well, yeah. It's, if, as we were, as you were discussing earlier in the first part of my book, I deal with statistics. Mm-hmm. And that's why I called my book The Invasion of the Orange Orbs, because back in 2003, I think it is, there were probably worldwide only about 3 or 4 of these orbs sighted. Mm-hmm. And by 2013, there were a couple thousand of them sighted in a year. That is an interesting phenomenon, which begs the question, why is this happening this way? And I have my own opinion if you want to hear it.
Certainly. Sure, that's why we have you on the show.
Yeah. I think at one time, a sighting of a UFO was extremely rare. Right. And people would publish this gray blurry thing and say, this is the UFO I saw.
Right.
You know, extremely rare.
Right.
And the Orange Orbs were in that class. They were extremely rare, but for some reason, they rather than being stealthy and avoid being seen, with the advent of the Orange Orb, where, you know, when they take a vehicle which would probably be invisible in the sky, but instead they start utilizing a cloak which makes them extremely visible. It's almost like they have a sign saying, "Look at me."
Mm-hmm. Right.
It is designed, it's a color, and it is bright enough that you would see it. And my opinion is they're intelligent beings. They're doing this for a reason, and I think the reason they're doing it is to gradually acclimate Earthlings to the fact that they're up there.
Right.
And I think they use a color and a shape, looks like the setting sun, but it's very non-threatening. And I think what they're doing is they are more and more and more populating the night sky. I actually just on a personal level, since my encounter in 2012, I've seen about 10 orange orbs since then. And they are everywhere, all over the world. And I think now the question becomes, why are they making themselves so obvious, and why do they want us to see them? I think what they're doing, they're conditioning us. I think if they all of a sudden just some huge ships appeared in the daylight, I think you would have worldwide panic.
Oh yeah.
And I think these beings are smart enough to know that, and I'm sure this is not the first planet they visited. And I think they know what they're doing, and I think they probably, with every planet they visited, they go through this conditioning process to the point that, I mean, there are people in places where orange orbs are a nightly sighting. I mean, as a matter of fact, I've seen so many. I barely. Last summer, I saw one going over, and I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat there and watched it go over, and there you have it. You know, I wasn't even that interested because I've seen so many. And anyway, I think what they're doing is, I think they want to make contact, but they want to do it in such a way that there's not extreme panic on Earth.
Okay.
And so they are. There are more and more of them. They're getting closer and closer to the Earth. There are more and more landings, and I think that's what it's all about.
I would like to talk to 2 points about that.
Okay.
One point has to do with what I had mentioned just like maybe 5 minutes ago, and that is that this seems to be one class, a very numerous class, but one class of sighting. So what do you think about there being multiple beings visiting or craft visiting the Earth? I know in your book, the fictional book, and I'm trying to look up the name of it again.
GXM 731.
GXM 731.
That was a great book, too.
It
Thank
was
you
a
for that.
wonderful book, and we both enjoyed reading it. In that book, you portray several races of beings from other galaxies and parts of the universe.
Right.
Coming to this airspace, so to speak.
Right.
Now, granted, that was a work of fiction, and it was very, very nicely done. But can you speak for a second to the idea that there could be other classes of beings visiting the Earth besides the Orange Orb?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it just makes sense. We live in a very big neighborhood, and just like the races on Earth, there are races that look very much different from one another, and that's just one planet, and they evolved in different ways, and they look, speak, and act in different ways. Now, if there is that much difference just on the surface of one planet, throughout the universe, there are many, many different conditions, different atmospheres, different gravity levels. It's certainly going to produce different looking beings. So, it's just logical that there are a lot of different beings out there.
So can we say then that although you've written this book, and it's a very good book about the Orange Orbs, and I commend you for it, but can we say that there are also other things that are seen out there?
Sure, there are lots of other things seen out there besides Orange Orbs. And obviously, because I was focused on Orange Orbs, that's why I was talking about the beings that are inside these Orange Orbs.
Yes.
And the proliferation of the Orange Orbs. I'm not sure. Maybe I really don't know if there are other races of beings. I have no doubt that they're up there. Actually, if you may recall in the Orange Orb books, people say, well, where are they? They keep showing up at night, but where are they? In the Orange Orb book, I traced the flight patterns of these orbs, and they have regular flight patterns. They come out about 8:30 at night, and they go back about 10 to 10:30 at night. That's when I saw them going back. And I have traced the routes back to where they're coming from. And there are actually 4 bases, underwater bases, where they
emanate
that's
from?
where they park during the day. There's one in Lake Erie. There's one off the coast of Miami, one off the coast of Sarasota on the other side of Florida in the Gulf, and one off the coast of Los Angeles.
And if we are
lots of people have seen these coming and going.
If we are to believe Hal Puthoff and his associates at Stanford Research Institute, there is apparently one somewhere in Australia of an alien base.
Oh, I'm sure there is. I only was focusing on the United States, but I'm sure they're all in water all around the world, probably in the deep trenches.
Yes,
we can't go.
That psychic, that remote viewer's name was Pat Price. I couldn't quite pull it up in the beginning, which brings me to what we're going to ask you about next, which is what is your opinion particularly on this quote-unquote to the stars disclosure, the Bob Bigelow situation, that whole piece of it, the Defense Intelligence Agency coming clean through Luis Elizondo and Jim Semivan and some of the other people there. What is your position on it? Particularly, what I'd like you to address is your feeling that these beings are somewhat benign in the way they're interacting with us, and I'd have to agree with you for the most part. But I have another question later. But let's talk a little bit to this new quote unquote disclosure scenario.
Well, first of all, I'll talk about the disclosure itself. That was what's his name? He was in the Defense Department. What was his name?
Luis Alessandro.
Right.
He was in Defense Intelligence Agency.
Part of the Pentagon UFO program.
Yes.
And he resigned when he thought there should be more disclosure.
Yes.
And he's the one that released this information about the pilots that saw these craft, which the pilots didn't come out and say it, but they said there's absolutely nothing on Earth that could do this. So I think that sort of is their way of saying it's extraterrestrial because it's not terrestrial.
Well, it's not human, let's put it that way.
Right. I don't think it's being made here on Earth.
Okay.
I just want to talk about the credibility of these pilots. I mean, call me biased, but I'm a former military pilot, and I flew, fancy jets. And I know that military pilots are very calm, objective people. You have to be. You're trained not to panic, not to exaggerate. And so when they describe what they saw, and you can see what they saw in their scope when they locked in on it. I think I have no doubt that what was on that scope and what they described is completely credible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you have a very credible witness telling you that they observed an extraterrestrial craft.
No argument here. That I would say no argument here, except that my idea is more expansive only insofar as I'm not willing to say definitely extraterrestrial. I'm willing to say definitely non-human. I don't know where they come from. I don't know if they come from a different star system. They may very well. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm just speaking to what I, as a human being, absolutely know.
Well, they could be human. I mean, there could be a whole different civilization based somewhere in Antarctica or something, and just developed a tech. I mean, just because the technology is superior doesn't mean that people can't do it.
I suppose. My thought is probably not human. I mean, you could be right, but my leaning is probably not human.
Unidentified.
What? It is unidentified.
But it was definitely an object. It was definitely flying, and I doubt if you could get a more credible witness
than these military pilots.
Right.
Absolutely. So now.
So what do you do about it?
Well, what I would like to.
This is why I sort of gave up on ufology. I mean, look, same with you, Mr. Ray. Phenomenal book, great description. So where do we go from there?
Well, there's one question to add to that.
Okay.
Is that in the disclosure, people they're speaking about a threat, whereas Terry seems to see it as reasonably benign. Can you put that together for us?
Sure. I think if they were malevolent, we wouldn't be here right now.
Yeah, we wouldn't be discussing it.
They had been, in my opinion, visiting. I'm sure there are civilizations much more ancient than ours. And I think they have been exploring the universe for quite a long time. And if they wanted to destroy this planet, they would have done it.
Well, there was a large flood here at one point, and
There was.
a lot of people felt that may have been extraterrestrially involved.
Yeah,
However,
it could have been. Yeah.
but I will say one thing about your orbs, and I've been interested in UFOs for a very long time, and I did sort of give up on it. And you're quite right. Orbs was like a small dot way off in the distance. No one saw them. Rarely reported. When it was like, yeah, we saw an orange orb. The way
Right.
you're reporting it, and you have to remember too that this is a technological society. Whoever's flying these things,
Yes.
and they're going to improve their models. I mean, we're no longer driving little Model T Fords, and so this may be the same UFOs, only an improved version of it. That whole
Yes.
cloaking device is fascinating.
That
It
is.
is.
That is really
It
fascinating.
To me, it
Oh.
shows a change in their mentality.
Oh yeah, this is
You
really
know,
interesting.
Why do they go from being invisible
Yeah.
to being broadcasting that they're up there?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's
Yeah.
got to be a motive behind
Yeah,
that.
this is pretty fascinating stuff. Plus the control of the physics and the atmospheric physics and the gravity. I mean, these fellas know what the hell they're doing.
I'm going to make one uncomfortable observation.
Right.
And that it has nothing specifically to do with the book, but it does have to do with whether or not they constitute a threat to humans. And that is the thousands upon thousands, is it 20,000 people a year go missing in the United States? Now, some of those people want to not be found and they're hiding, and other those people meet unfortunate deaths. But then we have the whole 411 series of books that started with the national parks, and people disappeared in the most uncanny ways, and sometimes their bodies were found miles and miles away from where they got lost. And some people postulate that these people were taken by aliens. And it is hard to find an exact human explanation for some of the bizarre incidents where people were found high up in trees or on the tops of mountains where they could not have possibly gotten to naturally.
Right.
Well, there's also reports of whole villages in China disappearing too, where the buildings are left and the people are gone. So whether or not that's true or it's just some sort of fiction that's being published, I don't know, but it's a little scary on that part. But, there's one other aspect to this, too, and that's the artificial intelligence aspect. I mean, that's getting stronger and stronger on this planet. And I'm wondering if maybe this is like a sort of counter-reaction to that, because it's a player now.
You mean the extraterrestrials are saying we're reaching a certain level?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure they... I think to a large extent, it's sort of what my novel is all about. To a certain extent, I think we're probably a research project for a lot of extraterrestrial civilizations.
Well,
Just like, our explorers went to Africa.
Well, except that I think what Sitchin says is we were actually planted here, sort of like a test animal, and
That's
allowed.
possible, sure.
Yeah, and let's see where
Yeah.
they go. And as you said, we always think in life cycles of 100 years. They may have 10, 20,000 years of life, which enables them to watch this develop.
Yeah.
So-
Well, if you were the people who planted the seeds, you would want to come back and look at your garden every now and then.
Exactly.
And
And I think that's what they do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind. The other thing too is we've seen so many exoplanets, and they just found one where there's 8 planets orbiting a sun. I think what we tend to discount on this planet too, it's probably through just a fluke of nature, it's probably one of the prettiest planets in existence, as you speculated in your fictional book.
Yes.
But I think that's another reason it's just attracting a lot of flies to honey. I think it's a very, very inviting planet. And we kept getting that message, too, from different abductees that say they were contacted with extraterrestrials. And they say you have such a beautiful planet and you're really messing it up. sort of straighten up and fly right. Maybe they're going to enforce that policy.
Yeah, we do have a pretty planet.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the pictures taken from the moon
Right.
of Earth, I mean, that is a beautiful sight. That's a little blue pearl out there.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that that caught the eye of other civilizations out there in the universe.
I wanted to just mention in your fictional book how you kind of treated the near immortality that those extraterrestrials had developed, and how I thought that was so very well thought out and interesting, how it worked to be part of the plot. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. I just wanted to comment on that.
I found that part fascinating myself. That's something I've often thought about. People are always talking about, well, I wish there was something that we would live forever. And in my novel, I get into that, as you know.
Yes.
And some of the beings in that novel really enjoy the fact that they don't get sick, they don't die. But there are others who find it absolute torment. And so there's two different, there's more than one reaction to it. It's not all positive.
Right. As it probably wouldn't be if it were to occur amongst humans.
I can't remember the name. Maybe you could help me out, Bill. But the one guy that the soul-sucking aliens from outer space, but he speculated that the little grays were either robots or androids, and although they did live forever, although intellectually they were quite advanced, emotionally they could not experience either colors or feelings or anything, and so their reason for coming to a planet of this nature would be to sort of, and that's why people were being abducted, so to observe emotions, observe feelings, and try to learn them, because they felt that was sorely lacking in their existence. So, I think you're probably onto something with that.
When you mention the grays, I think what the case I told you about when the large black parental figures were with the small figures, the observers said that the small figures looked like what they have read what grays look like.
Right.
So I actually think, in my opinion, I think the grays are the children of the large creatures.
Huh. That's interesting.
That's my opinion.
That is an interesting point of view. Before we say goodbye to you, I would like you to talk a little bit to your new book and the images. And you did send me some images which are going to be posted on our various websites and on YouTube when we get this published on YouTube, which won't be immediately, but on the website you'll be able to see it fairly immediately. You have a new book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. This will be my next book. It won't necessarily confine itself to Orange Orbs, and it's not going to be statistical in nature. It's going to be almost entirely photographic. I have, let's just say it's serendipity. I stumbled upon a method. I was dealing with an orange orb, a photo of an orange orb, and I thought, well, I'd like to know what's inside that. And so I started working with photographic tools, and this took me quite a long time. And I actually developed a technique where I could see what was under the cloak. And what you see under the cloak, first of all, are a bunch of very different things. And the photographs I have I was able to do some extreme focusing, and they're very, very clear. And I've been able to categorize through photos of the various types of vehicles that are up there in the sky.
Interesting.
And they're not only just orange orbs I'm analyzing. A lot of things that you think is a puffy little cloud up there isn't a puffy little cloud.
Whoa.
That's actually a type of cloak. They use all sorts of different types of cloaks, including invisibility.
Wow.
Because I sometimes, some of the photos I have, there's a tiny thing I'm focusing on, the object, and as it becomes clearer and clearer through enhancements using color and different techniques, it turns out that small object is a part of a huge object that you can't see.
And the picture that you had sent to me
Right.
involves one of the disclosed objects from
Yes.
the Pentagon and the Nimitz, and
Right.
and then I see it. You've run it through some filters, and I am not conversant on that type of analysis. But what we've got here is something that looks like a large capital I. It looks like that actually is oblong and has extensions at the front and the back of it. And it's quite fascinating. I don't know how you get to that, but we all look forward to seeing your new book in the future with these photographic analyses in them.
Right. I think it'll cause quite a stir.
Yeah, that's okay.
You
Well,
always have the naysayers, whatever, anything new, you always have the people go say, "Oh, it's fake," you'll have it.
Yeah, he spent
But
all this
I'll
time
My
and money
opinion is
producing
I'll let the
fakes, right?
photos speak for themselves.
Yes, indeed. So, Terry, before we let you go, would you like to repeat the names of your books and that sort of thing for our listeners who are going to go out and run up the sales of your books immediately upon hearing this broadcast?
Yes. Well, the fictional book, they're all from Sunbury Press. So if you go to Sunbury Press or just my name, Terry Ray, author, you'll see a list of all of my books. Just on Google it.
And that's
But,
R-A-Y. Terry R-A-Y.
R-A-Y, yes, Terry Ray, R-A-Y. And I usually one of the first two. There are other Terry Rays, but I'm usually number one or two. There's an actor called Terry Ray. He's almost always one. But then there's me. But anyway, the ones that the books that are relevant to what we're talking about here is GXM 731. That's the novel I wrote that we've been talking about. And the other book is the worldwide invasion of the Orange Orbs. The complete story of the worldwide invasion of the Orange Orbs.
And the new book?
Well, my publisher and I are talking about a title. We haven't decided yet.
Okay. I hope you'll
So-
let Shattered Reality know as soon as it comes out.
I will. It'll be out sometime, I would say, in the before June of next year.
And for a final question before you go, what do you see as the outcome of this Defense Intelligence Agency leak, let's call it?
Well, I don't see any change with the U.S. government.
No, I don't either.
They decided a long time ago that they were going to discourage any belief in extraterrestrials, and they're going to stick with that. A lot of this, I don't know how much time we have. We're probably running to the end, but a lot of this, their philosophy on this started with Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio program.
Yeah.
You recall that?
Yes,
Sure.
yes,
And there was extreme panic throughout the country over this, and I think they saw that just what a radio program could do, and there were even some killings.
Yeah.
Some people went out with their guns and they thought they were seeing aliens and they were shooting them. And I think that really affected the thinking of the federal government.
Yes.
And they thought, we can't reveal this, or we're going to have a Orson Welles audience on our hands. I really think that's where it started.
I think that people have changed somewhat from that time because of, because of Hollywood. We've seen a lot of Star Trek and all of that. But yet, we have to remember that there are about 8 billion people on the planet, give or take, right? I mean, we can agree on that. And that it's thought that if only 1 out of 100 people goes a little cuckoo and panics, you got millions of people out there who are not doing well, shall we say?
True. Well, I don't agree with. I think at one time panic would have happened, but I think we are far more sophisticated now than we were. Particularly with science now saying, well, there's lots of habitable planets out there. I think we are in a position, at least in the developed countries, that we could. I think we could deal with disclosure very well right now.
Plus, we're about ready to start exploring ourselves, so I don't think
we are.
Very close. So
yes.
I don't think it's going to be a huge surprise that somebody who has a brain would be exploring too. So.
Right. And I think with all the developments that are going on, it's going to become more and more difficult for the U.S. government to keep denying it and continue their program of humiliating and shaming anybody who claims to see a UFO. Well, that's been their plan for many years.
One very positive side of this quote-unquote disclosure, wherever it goes to in the future, is that here in the United States, fewer of the news outlets are treating this with derision, where previously they made fun of people. Now they're taking it a little bit more seriously. Not 1,000% seriously, but at least it's moving in that direction with the New York Times and the various other, the USA Today and CNN. They all were treating this like a serious subject, amongst other places.
It's a big step. This last disclosure with the fighter pilots was a big step. And this is the first time I remember that a UFO story in the media wasn't put at the end of the broadcast where they make jokes and laugh about someone seeing a UFO. This was actually mainstream news.
First page of the Times. First page of the Times.
Right.
So, Terry, I want to thank you so very much for being our guest today. And we hope to have you back again in the future. You were a fascinating and interesting guest, and I cannot recommend your 2 books more highly. They're very interesting exploration, both the fictional book and the nonfiction, The Complete Story of the Worldwide Invasion of the Orange Orbs. Thank you for being with us, Terry.
Thank you, and I enjoyed it.
All right. So long now. Okay,
I was going to say goodbye.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye now, Terry.
Take care.
Okay, well, what do you say there, Miss Kate?
I say it's as usual. You do have objects. They are flying. They are unidentified, and still nobody knows. Everybody has a theory. I think his are quite sound and well based. But they're still, unfortunately, theories until these things land and say, hi, it's me.
Yes. And one of the biggest theoretical parts of both of his theory and the theory of the To the Stars group is that this is extraterrestrial. You brought up another idea that it might be terrestrial down from...
I honestly, it's...
Antarctica, or it could be interdimensional, and they could have been here all the time.
No, it's not interdimensional, but it's... there's just so many of them. I mean, regardless of what method of flight or propulsion you have, it's still going to take energy to get from point A to point B. And so for that many vehicles to go from point A to point B, unless there is an energy source that's almost limitless, it's a huge expense. It's a huge expense.
Well, maybe they don't have a capitalist system or a money-based system. And Terry mentions
it still takes energy. And
Wormholes. He proposes wormholes. I don't have a dog in this race. Okay, we're just bantering.
Saying this is why it takes it would be a huge step if this were extraterrestrial. If it is, then indeed they have discovered a form of propulsion. Now, when you say energy, I'm not talking oil, but what I'm saying is that it takes beings energy to live. So when you devote energy to flight, it takes something from living beings. It has to. I mean, without getting into a whole bunch of a discussion, but so the cost of energy for that many vehicles to come here, that's why I hesitate to think it's extraterrestrial. That's all.
Okay, I could see that.
Who was that guy? Who is the guy that does SETI, the man?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gee.
Not Jill Tarter, but the other fella.
Yes.
He said it was so funny. He said, can you imagine an extraterrestrial going before their Congress and saying, look, I need X amount of dollars. I want to go there because I really like Earth women and, I'd like to do some genetic experimenting on them. So how about that? So what do you think his chances of getting that bill passed? Pretty zippo. So that's his argument against extraterrestrials.
Well, the anthropomorphization, both by Terry in his fictional book, which is a fabulous book, and I'm really interested in.
It was the first good sci-fi book I've read in a long, long time.
Yeah. And both the anthropomorphization of extraterrestrials is not troubling, but in fact, I almost agree with it insofar as you recall when we were up at the UFO Congress upstate New York, the UFO event, and I gave my little talk about extraterrestrial evolution. And, I do think it's highly possible if panspermia is a fact and if there are planets that are like Earth elsewhere, that it's possible that the evolution could be similar, but it's also possible that there are intelligent squid out there, out in ships, craft in the universe. So not everything has to be like an anthropomorphic sort of deal. Anyway, we're getting a little bit far afield. We're hoping to be back with you after the first of the year with another exciting episode of Shattered Reality.
Okay. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, happy 2018.